Good evening, I'm Amna Nawaz. Jeff Bennett is away. On the NewsHour tonight, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump head west as the margins remain razor thin in critical swing states, with days to go until voting ends. The Supreme Court allows Virginia to purge voter rolls, how unsubstantiated claims of non-citizens voting have spurred the move and the effect it could have on the election. And we examine the potential economic impact of Donald Trump's promise to deport immigrants en masse.
From a pure economic point of view, massive cost. Some sectors will have huge disruption.
Major funding for the PBS News Hour has been provided by
a law partner rediscovers her grandmother's artistry and creates a trust to keep the craft alive. A Raymond James financial advisor gets to know you, your passions, and the way you enrich your community. Life well planned.
On an American Cruise Line's journey along the legendary Mississippi River, travelers explore Civil War battlefields and historic riverside towns. Aboard our fleet of American riverboats, you can experience local culture and cuisine and discover the music and history of the mighty Mississippi. American Cruise Lines, proud sponsor of PBS News Hour.
Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. Both presidential candidates brought their campaigns to the Southwest today. Former President Donald Trump stopped in New Mexico, a detour from battleground territory, while Vice President Kamala Harris jetted off to Arizona. But before she left, Harris spoke with reporters about what's on the line on Election Day, just 5 days out. Laura Barone-Lopez begins our coverage with this report.
Be very clear that among the stakes in this election are whether we continue with the Affordable Care Act or not.
In between campaign stops today, Kamala Harris warned that health care is on the ballot, following a vow from House Speaker Mike Johnson for, quote, massive reform if Donald Trump is elected.
And now we have further validation of that agenda from his supporter, the Speaker of the House. The American people, regardless of who they're voting for, know the importance of the Affordable Care Act, as it is also called Obamacare, in terms of expanding people's coverage to health care.
In leaked video obtained by multiple outlets, Johnson echoed an audience member saying, quote, no Obamacare, and that changes needed to be made. Later, he walked it back, rejecting that he wants to gut the popular law, even though Trump himself has repeatedly said he wants to repeal the Affordable Care Act. It comes as both campaigns battle for votes in the Southwest. Harris in Phoenix, Arizona.
We have an opportunity to turn the page on a decade of Donald Trump trying to keep us divided and afraid of each other. We're done with that. We're exhausted with that.
I said, look, your votes are rigged. We can win New Mexico.
And Trump in not so far away Albuquerque, New Mexico.
If we could bring God down from heaven, he could be the vote counter, we would win this, we'd win California, we'd win a lot of states. You just got to keep the votes honest.
Last night, Trump touched down in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Wearing a reflective orange vest, he approached a MAGA-themed garbage truck. The 78-year-old appeared to stumble twice as he reached for the handle. From the passenger seat,
This truck is in honor of Kamala and Joe Biden.
Trump played up an off-script comment made by President Joe Biden, where Biden appeared to say Trump supporters are, quote, garbage. President Biden quickly clarified he was referring to a comedian who made a racist joke about Puerto Ricans at Trump's Madison Square Garden rally. Trump himself regularly calls Democrats enemies from within and repeatedly refers to the United States as the, quote, garbage can of the world. The theatrics didn't stop at the tarmac.
I'm president. I want to protect the women of our country. They said, sir, I just think it's inappropriate for you to say.
During his rally last night, against the apparent advice of his team, Trump insisted his policies would, quote, protect American women, a pledge he's made before. But this time, he added,
I'm going to do it whether the women like it or not.
Harris responded earlier today.
It actually is, I think, very offensive to women in terms of not understanding their agency, their authority, their right, and their ability to make decisions about their own lives, including their own bodies. And this is just the latest on a series of reveals by the former president of how he thinks about women.
It's this simple. We trust women.
In Pennsylvania, Harris's running mate, Governor Tim Walz, also seized on the remark.
They are going to send a loud and clear message to Donald Trump on November 5th. They're going to send that message whether he likes it or not.
Meanwhile, in a roughly 3-hour conversation with podcaster Joe Rogan, Trump's running mate J.D. Vance said abortion restrictions should be left to the states. And he suggested that white kids are pretending to be transgender in order to get into Ivy League schools.
Like, obviously, that pathway has become a lot harder for a lot of upper middle class kids. But the one way that those people can participate in the DEI bureaucracy in this country is to be trans. And is there a dynamic that's going on where if you become trans, that is the way to reject your white privilege?
Other members of Trump's inner circle are also making headlines.
Neither of us are doctors. Vaccines are safe.
On CNN last night, Howard Lutnick, tapped as co-chair of Trump's transition team, was asked whether or not RFK Jr. fits into a potential Trump administration. That prompted him to go on a baseless anti-vaccine rant.
Why do you think vaccines are safe? There's no product liability anymore. They're not proven.
Kids get them and they're fine.
Why do you think they're fine? We all know so many more people with autism than had it when we were young. Oh, come on.
Tonight, both candidates head to Battleground, Nevada, as voters there file into the polls. For the PBS News Hour, I'm Laura Barone-Lopez.
Just days before Election Day, the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that the state of Virginia will be able to continue to purge people from the state's voter rolls. The state has argued it's part of an effort to remove non-citizens from the rolls. But voting rights advocates have found several U.S. citizens were also removed from the rolls. NPR's Jude Joffe-Block has spoken with some of those voters. She joins me now. Jude, welcome to the NewsHour. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So the state of Virginia has removed some 1,600 people from its voter rolls since August. Why was it doing that purging in the first place?
So all states have an obligation to make sure that the voters on their rolls are eligible to vote. And what's really under debate here is how Virginia went about doing that and when Virginia did that. So Virginia has this program underway to identify non-citizens on the rolls, but the argument being made is that they aren't narrowly tailoring it enough to only target non-citizens, and that it's happening too close to the election. So under federal law, there's a rule under the National Voter Registration Act that states have to stop this kind of voter maintenance 90 days before an election. But Virginia says that doesn't apply here because they're targeting non-citizens specifically. But we've seen that this program has ensnared U.S. citizens.
So tell me about that. You spoke to some of these folks who say they are U.S. citizens. They were erroneously removed from the rolls. How did that happen, and what happens for them now?
There's a pattern where people have visited the DMV, and they at some point there must have made a mistake on a form where they marked a box identifying themselves as non-citizens somewhere in those forms. We're not really sure how exactly this happens. But after that visit to the DMV, they got a letter in the mail from their local election officials saying, "We think you might not be a citizen. Please affirm your citizenship." We spoke to a voter, Nadra Wilson, who that letter was sent to the wrong address. It got forwarded. By the time she got it, the deadline had already passed. She was able to re-register. We spoke to another voter, Rena Shaw. She did get the letter in the mail letting her know that she had to affirm her citizenship, and she did send it back. But even then, she was still not on the rolls, and she was able to call and sort that out. But all of this does take time. Both of those voters did end up voting early this week, though.
You know, we spoke with Anna Dorman, who's an attorney working with this nonpartisan civil rights group called Protect Democracy that helps voters to restore their voter registration. Here's what she had to say about this.
Especially within the new citizen community, there's a lot of fear. I've talked to people who have actually already fixed the problem with the registrar and affirmed their status and re-registered who are still scared to vote because they think that they've gotten a communication saying it might be illegal for them to do so. There's another group of people who are pretty indignant and frustrated that this happened. I spoke to one voter who said, you know, I'm supposed to choose my elected officials. They're not supposed to choose whether I get to vote.
Jude, even if it does end up being legally sorted out for individual voters, could this have some kind of an impact on the election?
I think this is a small number of people. This is 1,600 who've been purged so far in this election period, though there were actually people who were taken off the rolls even before August through this same program who, and we know some of those cases were eligible U.S. citizens as well, too. Luckily, because Virginia does allow same-day registration, a lot of these people will hopefully realize that they can still vote. So that is the silver lining here.
Let me just pull back the lens a little bit here, because this idea of non-citizens voting has really been elevated in Republican concerns, right? Despite the evidence that points to the fact that this isn't really a big problem in the country. So does this effort that we saw in Virginia tie into those more national concerns and conversation that we've seen?
It definitely does tie in. This narrative has been a key talking point this election season, and we've seen other states take aggressive actions right before the election, publicizing that they're taking non-citizens off the rolls, but really these efforts have also ensnared U.S. citizens. So that happened in Alabama, where at least more than 2,000 U.S. citizens were swept up in an effort that was supposedly targeting non-citizens on the Alabama voter rolls. And, election experts are suggesting that this false narrative that large numbers of non-citizens could vote could be used to lay the groundwork to sow doubt about the election and potentially be used for future election challenges.
NPR's Jude Joffe-Block joining us tonight. Jude, thank you for sharing your reporting and your insights with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We start the day's other headlines in Spain, where crews are searching for bodies in abandoned cars and swamped buildings after devastating flash floods. At least 158 people are confirmed dead, and an unknown number of others remain missing. The eastern region of Valencia was by far the worst hit. From there, ITN's James Mates reports.
This was how a flood was to be handled. A ravine, a channel that could tame nature and get water safely to the sea. On Tuesday night, nature had other ideas. 3 of the 4 bridges simply swept away, water surging 2 to 3 meters above the banks. Cars were tossed aside like toys, dumped even onto railway lines. And all with such speed that people, many on the streets on their way home from work, had little chance.
Sort of ocean came here and everything was underwater. Everything suddenly, in 10 minutes, all the town was absolutely full of water.
We found Elena and her husband Ismail beginning the clear up outside their home, just a few meters from where the river burst. Elena showed me how they fled up their front steps, only to find the water rushing in to waist height after them. The trauma of the next few hours is still with her. My son couldn't get to us, she said. I can't talk. It was a terrible catastrophe. Without being here at the time, it's almost impossible to conceive of the force of water that came down this street. Locals talk about it as a tsunami, and when you see what happened, when the water had nowhere else to go, simply smashed everything into the end of this street, they weren't exaggerating. The irony, of course, is that this sort of storm is not unusual here at this time of year. They thought they were resilient to it. It turned out they simply weren't. A local supermarket, still awash with mud and debris, opened its doors this morning and told people to take what they need. For years, experts have warned that freak weather was going to get more frequent and more intense. It has. Yet Europeans believe their modern societies can easily withstand such events. Then recent storms in Central Europe and now southern Spain may demand a serious rethink. James Mates, ITV News, Valencia, Spain.
Turning now to the Middle East, Lebanon launched back-to-back rocket attacks into northern Israel today, killing at least 7 people, including 4 foreign workers. It was the deadliest day in Israel since its military crossed into Lebanon early this month. Meanwhile, Israel continued its aerial assault of southern Lebanon. Health officials there say 45 people have died in just the past day. Eyewitnesses captured the scope of the devastation, including in the city of Baalbek, which is home to a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Across Lebanon, wary residents say they're tired of living in fear.
No one knows anymore where is safest and where is not. We are tired. The most important thing is that this doesn't drag on any longer. They must find a solution, a ceasefire, and implement a resolution in order to achieve peace.
Since Israel's incursion, the Lebanese government estimates that some 1.2 million of its people have been displaced in the conflict. U.S. officials say about 8,000 North Korean troops are now at Russia's border with Ukraine. They're expected to join the fighting in the coming days. The new figure is a sharp increase from just a day earlier, when Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin would only say some troops had moved towards the border. Austin joined Secretary of State Antony Blinken in a meeting with their South Korean counterparts in Washington today. They condemned the buildup of troops, as well as North Korea's ballistic missile test overnight, and the group agreed to expand their cooperation.
That's why the United States and the ROK are working so closely with our partners to stand up to coercive, destabilizing actions in both the Indo-Pacific and the Euro-Atlantic. Our work together is central to ensuring peace and stability and to enhancing deterrence.
Today's gathering comes as Russia continues its air assault on Ukraine. At least 3 people were killed, including 2 teenage boys, when a Russian glide bomb struck a residential building in Ukraine's second largest city of Kharkiv. Dozens of other people were injured. A Philadelphia judge has put a state case against Elon Musk's $1 million election sweepstakes on hold. City prosecutors had tried to stop the giveaways from Musk's Political Action Committee, saying they may violate election law. Musk did not show up at the hearing at Philadelphia City Hall today. His lawyers are trying to move the case to federal court. Musk has been handing out $1 million prizes to randomly selected voters in swing states who pledged their support for gun rights and free speech. The giveaways have continued as the legal challenge plays out. The Federal Reserve's preferred measure of inflation slowed last month to near pre-pandemic levels. It's a welcome sign for consumers ahead of the U.S. election. The latest report from the Commerce Department showed that prices rose 2.1% in September when compared to last year. That is down from a reading of 2.3% in August, and it's just a hair above the Fed's 2% inflation target. Separately, the number of Americans filing for unemployment fell last week by 12,000, pointing to ongoing stability in the U.S. labor market. On Wall Street today, stocks ended sharply lower as tech shares weighed on the markets. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost nearly 380 points on the day. The Nasdaq sank more than 500 points, or about 2.75%. The S&P 500 also ended sharply lower, dropping more than 100 points. And it was a Hollywood ending for this year's World Series champions, the Los Angeles Dodgers. Their series-clinching win over the New York Yankees last night was defined by an epic comeback or a remarkable collapse, depending on who you root for. New York blew a 5-0 lead in the 5th inning due to a number of errors. LA went on to win the game and the series. Today, the team brought the trophy back to Tinseltown. It's the Dodgers' second World Series win in just the last 5 years. Tomorrow, the City of Angels will host their heroes with a parade downtown and a celebration at Dodger Stadium. Still to come on the NewsHour, we examine the divide between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump on Social Security and Medicare spending, the rise of misinformation and threats to election workers as Election Day approaches, and the politics of abortion in the United States ripples through Kenya.
This is the PBS News Hour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington, and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
In the final days of this election, both presidential candidates are trying to win over older voters with their plans for entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare, which provide financial protections to retired and disabled Americans. But Social Security, a program that has long been popular with both parties, is at risk of being depleted as soon as 2034, and Medicare will be insolvent by 2036, leaving families without critical financial support. As part of our in-depth coverage of the candidates' promises and policies, Lisa Desjardins is here to walk us through how both campaigns say they will tackle the issue. Good to see you, Lisa.
Good to see you.
So let's start with the stakes here. If these programs do become insolvent, who's at risk?
A massive group of people. Before Social Security and Medicare were in place together, 35% of American seniors lived in poverty. That number is more like 10% now. If Congress and the White House do not do anything, Social Security will see 20% cuts within the next decade. And by some estimates, senior poverty will double. Now, there are ways to solve this. They're politically tricky, but it takes making tough choices.
All right, so let's start with what the candidates say here. And let's start with the program that's going insolvent. First, Social Security.
Neither candidate has a comprehensive plan to stabilize Social Security. And in fact, analysts have found that one candidate's plan would actually destabilize it. That's former President Donald Trump. Let's talk about how he speaks on this. Here's one of his messages on the campaign trail.
I will cut all of the bad talk about Social Security. They're going to destroy your Social Security, but I will not cut 1 cent from Social Security or Medicare. And I kept my promise for 4 years that I will keep it again. And seniors should not pay taxes on Social Security.
Okay, so Trump specifically says he will end income taxes on Social Security. He would end payroll taxes, which fund Social Security on tips and overtime pay, and in addition, not raise the retirement age, currently 67 years old. He has no proposals for making the system more solvent. And I should also point out, 20 years ago in a book, he had different policy proposals. He wanted to privatize the system and raise the Social Security retirement age then.
So you said the plans would make Social Security less stable, right? How so, specifically?
Specifically, Trump's plan has been analyzed by the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget. The system is running out of money as it is, and essentially his plans would reduce the funding. So let's look at what they found. They found that Trump's plan would most likely make Social Security insolvent and force cuts 3 years sooner, by 2031. And the cut eventually would be larger, a 33% cut in benefits in 10 years, they found. Now, this also is something that would affect people beginning with those who are 60 years old now and want to retire by 67. And of course, Amna, those kinds of cuts would affect everyone on Social Security now as well.
So we know Vice President Harris has been critical of former President Trump's plans, but what are her plans? What would she do?
Yeah, let's start with how Vice President Harris talks about Social Security herself.
My plan includes what we need to do to strengthen the solvency of Social Security. It includes what we're going to need to do and work with Congress to make sure we're putting more into it. And it cannot be about cutting benefits, because right now those benefits are barely adequate as it is.
Now, Harris has also not given any details about how she would keep the system solvent while potentially expanding benefits. And remember that doing nothing about that means there would actually be an automatic cut going into place by 2034. So without any more details, Harris's plan heads us towards a cut in Social Security. We spoke to Maya McGinnis, who heads the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, about these two plans for Social Security.
If you just take Social Security, what's really astounding is you have both candidates talking about how they promise to protect the program. If we do nothing, in 9 years, there will be across-the-board benefit cuts of almost a quarter for every retiree who is collecting benefits, and that's unconscionable.
And it's also not something either candidate is really facing up to on the campaign trail.
Okay, so that is Social Security. Medicare is also at risk. What did the candidates say about that?
I'm sorry to say neither candidate has a plan to stabilize that either, but Harris does have some proposals for Medicare that are significant, and we should point out. She wants to expand the plan and would negotiate all drug prices, and that could save billions of dollars for Medicare and for the government. She likes to point out that she and President Biden expanded the program and started the program to negotiate on drugs, but former President Trump does not have a specific prescription drug plan. And he also, it's not clear if he would allow Medicare to keep negotiating prices or if he would expand it. We just don't know. Harris would use the savings from this idea of negotiating more drug prices to begin a new benefit for in-home care. Former President Trump also is interested in that, but it's not clear how he would pay for it. As things stand, though, the bottom line is neither candidate has a plan to stabilize Medicare, and we are on that same track where it's a program that will face benefit cuts if nothing else happens.
It's fair to say the situation with both these systems is approaching dire. So how do voters feel about this? What do they say?
This is a really important sleeper issue, especially with a key group of voters, older voters. The AARP did a survey of American voters over 50, and they found that Harris has an advantage here. When asked who do you trust more on Social Security and Medicare, 48% said they trust her more than Donald Trump. One more thing, we keep talking about how the economy tops concern for voters. This is part of that issue in America. The AARP found that with those voters over 50, that when they were asked about what would help them most financially, their personal economy, Social Security, protecting Social Security was tied for first with food prices. We talk so much about inflation, but keeping Social Security intact is something that older voters realize is a key part of their economy and also the national economy.
So important to point out the economy means so many things to different people.
That's right. And older voters, this is an issue that I think has just not been given enough attention by the candidates, in part because it is difficult. Either you have to raise some kind of revenue or you have to cut benefits. They know that's the case, and the longer that they wait, Amna, the more painful it's going to be for them, for our seniors, for you and I, for just about everyone waiting. So this is really sort of a failure in addressing a critical American problem.
Lisa Desjardins, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Immigration remains another key issue in this campaign. Vice President Harris says if elected, she will pass a bipartisan bill strengthening border security. Former President Trump promises a much larger crackdown, including mass deportations. One of the key claims from Trump and others that immigrants commit a disproportionate number of crimes has been disputed and contradicted by data. But there's been an economic argument made by the former president as well, that immigrants take jobs and lower wages for other Americans. Our economic correspondent Paul Salman gave that a closer look.
An invasion of criminal migrants.
For former President Donald Trump, immigration has long been an obsession.
We're a dumping ground. We're like a garbage can for the world.
But Vice President Harris, too, promises to crack down on illegal crossings.
We will pursue more severe criminal charges against repeat violators.
55% of Americans say they favor reduced immigration amidst a record number of illegal crossings late last year, straining resources in several cities, including here in New York, though crossings have since plunged. These are immigrants in the South Bronx, learning construction safety basics. Almost all have asked for asylum and are in legal limbo until their cases are resolved.
How many of you think you will be working in 2 months?
What kind of work? Well, Carmine Tavares came here years ago from the Dominican Republic. He says he's done every job he could find.
Construction, electrician, carpenter, plumber, and locksmith.
Wilbur Alva has been here just 1 month.
En Home Depot.
I go to Home Depot. A lot of migrants go to look for construction jobs there.
Alfonso Melendez endured the nightmare trek from Venezuela through the Darien Gap jungle to get to America with his 2 young sons and wife Bianeh.
We were robbed just as we were exiting the jungle. The masked men came out and they stopped everybody crossing. So it was in a large group and they stole from everyone. And those who didn't have anything to give, at times there were young women, pretty women there. And these men just took it upon themselves to rape them.
Bianeh and her husband say they're forever scarred. Knowing what you know now, would you do it again?
No.
No.
Ya hoy en día no.
It's too much psychologically.
Psicológicamente.
Lots of bodies riddled the path.
Donald Trump also stresses a more seemingly plausible dark side of immigration, the immigrants' economic impact.
It's not just the crime, your jobs are being taken away too.
Especially low-wage jobs, says Stephen Camarata, who has long advocated for fewer immigrants.
The vast majority of people who do all the low-wage work in the United States are U.S. born.
So, key question, are immigrants displacing American workers? Well, almost any employer will tell you how hard it is to find reliable workers these days.
Most of the people that are coming are in working age. They're going to do the jobs that I don't want to do, you don't want to do, nobody else wants to do, and we're not doing.
When Juan Pablo Morales, the program coordinator here, came from Guatemala 14 years ago, he too started at the bottom.
I was putting floors, I was teaching English, cutting hair, killing rats.
Killing rats?
Absolutely.
How do you kill rats?
I have some friends that have Jack Terriers, and we would take them out at night and hunt rats in vacant lots of New York City. We would get paid just to walk around and do that.
Carmine Tavares says immigrants have to take whatever job they can get.
They have to take any opportunity available because they have to provide for themselves and for the people they're with, and they don't have access to health care. They don't have any assistance.
2,400 miles west, Janelle Baker runs a ranch in rural eastern Nevada. Her father has a dairy farm nearby.
What's your reaction when you hear that immigrants are taking jobs from Americans?
I think it's dumb.
Dumb?
Dumb. It's uninformed. They're not taking your job. You don't want it. You don't want to do it. If you want to, you would be applying when we advertise. My dad wouldn't be looking for milkers all the time. Nearly everyone we know in agriculture is looking for someone.
Case in point, for years, Baker has posted an irrigation job.
We had a couple of people that said, my son would like a job. I never heard from them. Another time we had someone call, say they were interested, and they never showed up. This year we had someone looked at the requirements of the job and decided they didn't want to do it. But he was the only person to actually show up and talk to my husband about the job.
Okay, but what about the recent wave of immigrants? Can the economy really absorb all of them?
New York City is the vacuum of jobs, especially the construction industry. There is a job for anybody that wants to work, especially if you're willing to do anything.
Jobs that native-born Americans don't or won't do?
It would be wrong to say there are jobs that Americans simply don't do. If 2/3 of construction laborers, based on the American Community Survey, are U.S. born, you can't say no American does that job or is interested.
And here's a crucial point, says Stephen Camarata. Immigrants depress wages below what many Americans can bear.
If you increase the supply of anything, in this case labor or workers, you tend to lower its price. If a job is very heavily immigrant, then that is likely an area where immigration has significantly pushed down wages. And some of those jobs are really unpleasant, like construction labor. So you would want wages to be relatively high there. And one of the things immigration does is tends to hold down wages, making the occupation less attractive.
But Carmine Tavares says there are construction jobs American workers won't do, even for high pay.
I see the people you pay $50 something and work in the construction, and sometimes don't work. I see that with my eyes.
Juan Pablo Morales, long since an American citizen, sympathizes.
There's a lot of jobs that I had to do. If I'm not in a spot in my life again where I have to, I won't.
Business school professor Zeke Hernandez.
We have very clear evidence that native-born young men and women will simply not do those jobs. They will not take them, even during times of very high unemployment.
But, argues Camarada, if fewer immigrants mean higher wages, then maybe Americans will take the jobs, especially less educated men.
The share of men not in the labor force, that is neither working nor looking for work, is about triple what it was in 1960. And it's nearly double what it was even 25 years ago. As long as we have a supply of eager immigrants, we are never going to address this problem.
And think of all the available jobs were Donald Trump to deliver on his campaign vow.
We're going to get these people out. We're going to deport them so rapidly.
That would cost all of us, says economist Giovanni Perry.
The income that this undocumented generate in the U.S. is about 3.5% of the U.S. GDP. So in the order of $1 trillion per year. Plus, you will have all the cost of running this operation that will also be huge. From a pure economic point of view, massive cost. Some sectors will have huge disruption.
What would happen to American agriculture, let's say?
So I think you'd tank it. In our area, if you were to pull out all of the immigrants, documented and undocumented, it would devastate our area.
Here in New York, construction never stops. Who's doing that construction?
Tim Driscoll runs the Bricklayers Union.
I don't believe the industry could actually survive that kind of mass loss of workers.
And besides, says Driscoll,
the only way there was a reduction in unauthorized workers in this country was when the pandemic hit and employment opportunities ceased to exist. And the reason that a lot of folks were attracted here disappeared. We had the 4-year experiment of self-deportation. It failed.
Just so, says Professor Hernandez.
There's a study that came out recently showing that the biggest predictor of illegal border crossings is unfilled job openings in the United States. We need these people.
And at the moment, at least, we certainly seem to. For the PBS News Hour, Paul Salmon in the Bronx.
Officials across the country are working overtime to ensure Election Day is a success, and the stakes are high. William Brangham has a closer look at the threats causing concern. William?
Thanks, Amna. From rampant disinformation, foreign adversaries trying to sow chaos, ballot boxes set ablaze. There are many bad actors trying to undermine our elections process. But there's also an army of nonpartisan elections officials who are collecting ballots and pushing back, confident that this election, like the last, will be secure. For a closer look at what we need to know in advance of Tuesday, we are joined again by Juliette Kayyem. She's a former Assistant Secretary at the Department of Homeland Security and Faculty Chair of the Homeland Security Program at Harvard's Kennedy School. Juliette, so good to have you back on the program. You have been advising elections administrators around the country in the lead up to Tuesday. What is the mood like amongst them right now?
It is nervous, but also no surprises. In other words, everyone has been anticipating what we're now seeing going on, which is both a coordinated and ad hoc sort of attack on how we vote, where we vote, what we understand to be the truth in the information space. And so this is not a surprise to them, but let's just be honest, the system wasn't built for this. So they're adapting and pivoting in real time.
Let's talk about some of those different threats. One of them has been physical attacks. We saw these ballot boxes lit on fire in the Pacific Northwest. We saw a man in Arizona shoot up a DNC office. Again, not an elections office, but how are elections officials preparing for those kinds of physical, so-called kinetic attacks?
So that's their biggest concern because, of course, it is the get out the vote next Tuesday, which has to be protected. And you have lots of volunteers, lots of young people, lots of old people, and their physical safety is the most important. In most instances, private security is also being hired to buttress public safety security, preventative measures, everything from lighting and videos to sort of make sure that there's eyes and ears everywhere. Are occurring. And so there's both defense in terms of essentially locking down to the extent that you can, and then preparing if there are attacks, what you would do. In my opinion, it is less likely that any individual place is going to have a physical attack. There's going to be lots of hoaxes, lots of disinformation. The goal is to disrupt the get out the vote. So just think about what 10 bomb threat scares could do in an urban area in a swing state. And so there's lots of practicing about, essentially how do you move from one building to another out into the street. You just got to keep focusing on get out the vote. And that's what a lot of the training and practicing is doing right now.
I mean, what a world we live in.
I know.
I mean, apart from this physical threat, there's also this concurrent information war attack against the voting system. The former president and many of his allies have continued for 4 years to say that the last election was stolen and that this one currently is also being cheated upon and stolen. We also know that polls show that this message has penetrated to Republicans, where some polls show half, some show a majority of Republicans believe there will be cheating and fraud. How on earth do we defend against that?
So the first thing is just to say factually, there is simply no evidence of rampant sort of institutionalized voter fraud. You are going to see cases here or there of which people are arrested or there are mistakes made. Millions of people are voting. That is going to happen. So it's just worth the sort of the groundwork is we have as a country the most safe and fair elections in almost any democracy at this stage, given how bifurcated it is. I mean, you have so many different polling places. So that's the first thing. The second is the information pushback that's going on now against a concerted both foreign and domestic campaign to undermine the validity of this election, not just to disrupt the vote on Tuesday, lies about place and time and whether you're authorized to vote, but also to create a narrative that should Donald Trump lose in the election, he'll create a narrative that he didn't lose fairly, that the votes were stolen from him. That narrative, there's a lot of people interested in promoting that narrative, including the Russians, including Elon Musk, who owns Twitter and X, and who has, we know, promoting falsities about the vote. The best thing one can do, and there's two things. One is citizens need to get smart about their information intake, including people who think they are sophisticated inhalers of intelligence. We all tend to get whipped up at the random person who says something. We need to validate it. The other is you're starting to see public and private entities push back on the lies early on. I have never seen, for example, the United States government give attribution to the Russians for a lot of lies that they're sort of pushing in social media about fake votes and about voting places losing ballots. The United States is going to name and shame to the extent it can as well.
I mentioned at the beginning that elections officials say, look, 2020 was the safest, most secure election we have ever had. And they think that they're going to be the same or better this year. Do you share that confidence?
Yes, I do. The thing that I can't sort of qualify or quantify right now is how many people are willing to break federal law. So a reminder, this is breaking federal law to disrupt the vote. And if they're willing to do that, then you can see disruptions that we hadn't imagined in the past.
All right, that is Juliette Kayyem of the Harvard Kennedy School. Always great to see you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Abortion is a closely watched issue in this year's election, and not just in the United States. Former President Trump cut funding for international groups that offer or even counsel on abortion services. Advocates on both sides of the debate in Kenya are watching for who wins and what that may mean. With the support of the Pulitzer Center, special correspondent Neha Wadekar reports from Nairobi. And a warning, this story contains accounts of sexual and gender-based violence.
Anne became an orphan when she was just 10 years old. With nowhere to turn, she moved to Dandora, Kenya's largest dump site, and began sorting trash to earn some money. Shortly after she arrived, Anne was raped by an older man. We have changed her name and concealed her identity. Anne soon started making a living as a sex worker. Many of her clients were abusive, and some refused to wear condoms.
That's because when you meet a guy, if you ask him to use protection, he says, "I don't eat a sweet while it's still wrapped."
At age 13, Anne became pregnant. Nearly 1 in 5 Kenyan girls becomes pregnant before they're 18, in part due to poverty and lack of sex education and access to contraception. Back in 2004, abortion was completely illegal in Kenya. Anne used black market pills for her first abortion. Her second pregnancy 2 years later was harder to terminate.
So I used knitting needles. It got to the point where I bled for 2 months. I had to go to the public hospital where I got help.
Anne's story is far too common in Kenya, where an estimated 7 women and girls die each day from unsafe abortions. Many who survive the procedures are left with severe complications, says Monica Agutu, founding executive director of the nonprofit healthcare organization KMET.
They bleed a lot from these damaged organs. We have seen cases that sharp object goes through the uterus.
The country's 2010 constitution now permits abortion in a narrow handful of circumstances, like for emergency treatment or if the life and health of the mother is in danger. But it's still confusing, even for physicians, says Dr. Ernest Niamato, an associate director at the nonprofit IPASS. Kenya is also a very religious country, and abortion is highly stigmatized.
When you see this ambiguity, and as a medical provider, you take the safer road and say, let me not provide these services, or let me allow other people to do it. So instead of accept this thing of this is a backstreet service, let it stay there.
Some government facilities do perform abortions. Private clinics also do, but they can be expensive, so women look for other, cheaper options.
For abortion, we have charged $3,500. If you have 2 months, it's $3,500. If it's 5 months, we take $4,000.
Pamela is a traditional medicine vendor who charges women and girls between $27 and $31 for help. Pamela claims she stopped selling abortion-inducing herbs long ago. This type of denial is commonplace among black market actors offering illegal abortion-related services, both in person and on social media, where misinformation thrives. If the herbs don't work, a woman might turn to a quack doctor for help. This is a room in a back alley abortion clinic in one of Nairobi's informal settlements. Many of the people who work here claim to have medical training, but really have very little. They'll often use unsterile instruments like this to perform unsafe abortion procedures on women and girls, which can leave them either infertile or even lead to death. Samuel is a self-proclaimed doctor who offers surgical abortion to poor women with nowhere else to turn. We've changed his name because his work is illegal.
The challenge is, for example, when you want to interact with somebody who has just come for it, it has to be a secret because the government doesn't allow.
Many poor and indigent women who die from back alley abortions end up at public morgues. Abandoned fetuses often end up there too. Some of those fetuses are fished out of the river in Dandora, the slum where Anne lives. After her own 2 abortions, Anne helped other women and girls abort around 150 pregnancies using a rusty pair of knitting needles. She throws the fetuses in this river at night to avoid getting caught. Anne, do you ever feel any guilt?
Yes, I do. That's because we're taking the life of young babies. But we have to do that because we have no other choice.
Since Kenya adopted its 2010 constitution, the country's judges have expanded abortion access through several major court decisions. But after Roe v. Wade was overturned in 2022 in the United States, abortion rights advocates became concerned that the same thing could happen in Kenya. One of the groups pushing for those decisions to be overturned is the Kenya Christian Professionals Forum, led by a constitutional lawyer named Charles Kanjama.
We believe that abortion is not care. Abortion doesn't save lives. Abortion
takes lives.
Several cases are making their way through Kenyan courts, including one petitioning for unborn children's right to life and for equal protection and benefit of the law. A familiar argument in the United States' own abortion debate, says Martin Onyango, a lawyer at the Center for Reproductive Rights.
Those are not new tactics. Those are the same tactics being applied by the opposition group in the US, in various states, and also at the Supreme Court.
That's in part because the Kenyan anti-abortion movement is being bolstered by international groups, especially American groups, promoting conservative policies and ideology in Africa. These groups travel to Africa as speakers for events and conduct anti-abortion training sessions. According to parliamentarian Esther Passaris, this type of campaigning is highly influential because politicians fear losing the support of important conservative voting blocs.
I think the idea that you will offend the church, the idea that you will lose votes if the church doesn't endorse you as a candidate.
There are huge sums of money flowing from American conservative groups into the continent of Africa. A 2020 investigation by Open Democracy revealed that $54 million flowed from U.S. Christian right groups to Africa between 2008 and 2018. Many of these groups are led by prominent American evangelicals with close ties to former President Donald Trump and his administration.
To protect the unborn, I have reinstated a policy first put in place by President Ronald Reagan.
Trump also reinstated and expanded the Mexico City policy, known as the Global Gag Rule, which restricts U.S. funding to any international organization that performs or even counsels on abortion. These policies emboldened anti-abortion advocates during his term.
They don't use federal funds to support pro-abortion organizations. So the noise of pro-abortion in our countries goes down.
They also created a chilling effect for Kenyan reproductive health care providers like KMET, who chose to lose $3 million in U.S. funding rather than stopping abortion-related services.
We had 15 staff that we laid off. It was the most difficult moment for me as the CEO of the organization.
With an American election around the corner, Kenyans on both sides of the issue are waiting to see which way the chips fall.
Depending on the government that is elected in the United States, we may have either continued progress in realizing reproductive rights, or we can go back. We can lose the gains that we have made.
The stakes are highest for Kenyan women and girls, who will feel the greatest impact if abortion rights are rolled back once again. For PBS NewsHour, I'm Neha Wadekar in Nairobi, Kenya.
And remember, there's a lot more online, including conversations with several young voters on what's driving them to the polls. That's at pbs.org/newshour. And we know it's Halloween tonight. Millions will be trick-or-treating and celebrating the spookiness of the season. But it's also Diwali, the Hindu festival of lights. And in northern India, a record 2.5 million clay lamps line the Saryu River in the city of Ayodhya. The waterway is believed to be the birthplace of the deity Lord Ram. The lights of Diwali symbolize the triumph of good over evil and knowledge over ignorance. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Amna Nawaz. On behalf of the entire NewsHour team, thank you for joining us and have a happy, or should I say, spooky Halloween.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
our economy for 160 years. BNSF, the engine that connects us.
I absolutely love my job because I love the people I work with. Everyone is trying to connect on a personal level.
We look out for one another. We love to see
our teammates thrive.
You don't have to change how you walk. You don't have to change how you talk.
We can bring our authentic selves to work and do our best stuff. That's joy.
The ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour, including Leonard and Norma Chlorfine and the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation. The Ford Foundation, working with visionaries on the front lines of social change worldwide. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. The final night of an extraordinary campaign. Will voters send Donald Trump back to the White House?
We stand on the verge of the 4 greatest years.
Or will Kamala Harris make history?
Are you ready to make your voices heard?
A PBS News special, Election 2024, Tuesday, November 5th at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 Central.
You're watching PBS.